Okay. Good. There we go. Thank you, Jonathan, for being here and I'm so glad you made it safely.
Parking was really tough, guys. I don't know how you get to these meetings.
Well, I would say I think you are good to go. But before we do that, I want you to remind me again, even though it was only a little while ago, what your position again at the Boulder Chamber is.
Sure, I'm the second coming of John Taylor. No, I'm the senior director of policy and programs for the Boulder Chamber.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, well, I'd say take it away and let me know if you need help or if you need me to do something so you can share screen.
Awesome. All right. Well, what I'm going to try and do here is a little double duty. I'm going to do a little bit of a share screen, but first of all, it's really nice to see all of you, even if you're only in 2 dimensions. I know that as Democrats, we're actually 3-dimensional people. And Lisa, I'm always cognizant of time and appreciate you allowing me to take some time with all of you, but remind me how much time I have and I'll speed up or slow down based on the constraints.
You have about 30 minutes.
Awesome. All right. Well, my introduction was going to be 30 minutes, but we'll speed right through that and go straight to actually, I'm going to go straight to waxing a little poetic first, and then we'll go into this presentation. So, quick show of hands here. First of all, how many people saw the State of the State speech yesterday? All right. And the rest of you with your screens off, I'll just assume oh, wow, I got a thumbs up, an animated thumbs up at that one. So pretty awesome. All right. So pretty impressive State of the State speech. Very bold, very outgoing. A couple of takeaways that I heard in there was, first of all, that, this is the first time in Colorado history that we have a majority female General Assembly, both House and Senate, which, We've made history. We're only the 2nd state in the nation to do that. So we should be proud of the representation that we have, especially here in Boulder County. And the other takeaway that I heard was Jared Polis talking about limitless possibilities. And so I'm going to throw a little bit of cold water on that second one, actually, because we actually have a 120-day session constitutionally mandated at the State General Assembly. So limitless possibilities for the next 109 days. After that, well, we're going to have to wait till next year. And so this is a limited time offer. For those of you who don't know, I think this is incredibly important to be aware of, is that your state lawmakers have 120 days to vote on somewhere between 300 and 500 bills. And 300 and 500 bills. Not all of them make it through the House, and so some of them die before they get to the Senate. Not all of them make it to the Senate, so sometimes, they, and so, an individual lawmaker may vote on a handful fewer of those. But when you're thinking about that, that's basically, about 3 laws a day. If any of us were given that as a job, that by itself might be a full-time job. So what I thought I would do is a couple of things. I wanted to give you a quick high-level overview of what it looks like from a legislator's perspective at the Colorado General Assembly. And then what I wanted to do after that is take it a step further and really look at this from the perspective of pull the screen back just a scotch and see what it looks like. So anyway, I'm sharing my screen. I'm hoping you're seeing something that looks like a slide that says "in the House." Got a thumbs up on. Keep giving me whatever finger is appropriate, either the thumb, the middle finger, whatever it takes. So I know a lot of us members of Democratic Women of Boulder County have been down to the Capitol. This is what a lot of people imagine it to be like. And I know Susan, Representative McCormick's aide, my aide, Representative Deb Gardner's aide before that, knows that this is exactly what things look like at the Capitol when you come to meet your state legislator, right? You've got 5 different staff members all ready to tell you the right thing at the right place. always equipped with the best quips possible. The only thing you'll see missing in this, because the West Wing happened a couple decades ago, is no one actually has any electronic devices. Not really the case. Finally, legislature is finally starting to pay legislative aides an almost living salary, but every legislator essentially gets one, and it's not for the full year. It's not full-time for the full year. So when you look at this, it's not really what it looks like at the state level. Now, some people might be afraid it looks kind of like this. And I actually meant this to be a bit of a joke slide because January 6th had not yet happened when I first made this PowerPoint presentation. Sadly, we have life imitating art as much as we have art imitating life nowadays. But what I will say, the vast majority of the time at the state legislature, the people there didn't necessarily get elected to office by being jerks to other people. You have to have some social skills to be liked by more people than the other person. There are exceptions to that rule, Lauren Boebert, but for the most part, this is oftentimes the case. And this is what it looks like on a good day. You see in the top right-hand picture, I still had hair, so it was a great day. But I like to share this with folks is, from a legislator's perspective, from right to left here, if you look at the top corner picture, you see State Senator Raleigh Heath, Governor, then Governor Hickenlooper, now Senator Hickenlooper, and what I like to call my constituent, who is the triple threat. She, one, was a constituent, but she was also a hockey mom, as you can tell. She's got her son next to her. His teeth are not missing from hockey. That's just natural. Those were baby teeth falling out. So hockey mom. And she's also a licensed mental health professional that works with abused and neglected kids. And she writes risk management policies for youth sports organizations. So she came to me and she said, well, Jonathan, you were a social worker. You dealt with teachers who were mandatory reporters of child abuse and neglect. Yeah, of course. Well, did you happen to know that youth sports coaches who aren't employed by public schools are not mandatory reporters? Like, you're kidding me. That can't be the case. Of course, I go back, I look it up. You're right. Well, let's go change the law. And the first year that she came up with that idea, brought that to me, we were able to convince a majority of the House, the Senate, the governor to sign a bill to change the law. And so this is really an example of what it looks like on a good day. The other two pictures are this. On the top left-hand corner, I always tell people being at the state legislature is a lot like being in college. Not just the drinking, but you get the opportunity to actually learn a ton of information from experts who are at your fingertips, because there's 100 lawmakers making decisions for over 5.5 million people in Colorado. So if you didn't know this already, coming from Boulder, we are one of the top 3 states, maybe 4, per capita, and even in general volume for the aerospace industry. So behind basically California, Florida, Texas, which are much larger states, with many more resources. But I always tell people Colorado is a mile closer to outer space than those places. And we have a great flagship university here that helps support that. And so, whether it's Lockheed Martin or NASA or University of Colorado, or any other number of people from the aerospace industry, they are there at the Capitol, willing, ready, and excited to share that information with lawmakers that are, hopefully willing to listen. The last picture on this slide is a little different. In this picture, what you'll actually see, this is from over a decade ago now. Myself, the governor, the former director of human services, now District Attorney Beth McCann, now County Commissioner John Kafalis, State Senator Jeannie Nicholson, who's a public health nurse, and State Senator Linda Newell, who actually just got her degree in divinity, all started working on child welfare issues. If you remember, 2012 wasn't just the year we legalized marijuana. It was also the year that the Denver Post and 9 News came out with a report called Failed to Death. And it was about kids that were known to the child welfare system, known to child protective services, that were dying, literally being killed by foster parents, dying in the system, not getting the attention that they needed. And so House leadership looked at me and they said, look, you were a social worker, go work with Senator Gonzalez, Senator Nicholson, come up with a plan. And the Department of Human Services, same thing. The media shined such a spotlight on this that we revolutionized our child welfare systems. I'll give you just one example. You'll see actually 4 bills sitting on the table there, 5 bills sitting on the table. And these bills were all had different things to do with our revolutions in the child welfare system. But I'm just going to give you one example. Before 2014, there were 64 different hotline numbers for Child Protective Services. So if you were worried about a kid, 64 different numbers. Not a great way to do things. Actually, really terrible way to do things in many ways. So we wrote a bill that said, you know what, you're going to create a routing system where just like when you call 911, call 911 in Boulder, it goes to Boulder PD. Call 911 in Longmont, it goes to Longmont PD. You still have the local control, but there's some quality assurance. Those calls are recorded. People can go back to them and look at them for evidence. They can see whether or not things were quickly responded to or appropriately responded to. That's just one example of the things we were able to do on a good day. But those ideas have to go to a committee first. And once again, quick show of hands. How many people here have been to a legislative committee hearing here in, all right, Carol's raising her hand. Carol, do you want to try and unmute real quick? Just tell me which committee to go. How was the experience?
I'm trying to remember the name of the committee, but they were exploring.
Or maybe you don't have unmute privileges. I don't know.
I just unmuted. Can you hear me? I don't think you can hear me. I
right.
Hear you.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, okay.
There.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Now I can hear you. Okay, I pressed the wrong button. So
It was a committee hearing where they were exploring different possibilities of looking at how to make safer schools, what different things you can put into that. And I mean, the committee members were up front. It was public hearing, so you'd have a panel of people that would come up and present ideas or letters or opinions about things, and then sit down, and we were able to hear what the committee was discussing and thinking about everything. So, all right.
yeah, so a lot of people think it looks a little like this, Carol. I don't know if you saw any legislators falling asleep. This is Larry Summers, former president, Harvard University, listening to the former president of the United States in the foreground. I don't know who would be passing out, but this is just a great reminder that cameras could be on any of us at any time, and then used in a PowerPoint later. I don't know where I stole this picture, so I'm not going to take credit for it. But this is kind of what it can look like sometimes. Anyone have this experience? Hopefully not. Jack Nicholson did not yell at you while you were at the legislature. It's probably a good thing. But this is what it's really like, right? And Carol put it incredibly well, actually. I'll give you another example. With 500 bills being introduced every year, most bills are not going to be the premier. I mean, gun violence, really important. Most bills are not going to be on gun violence or on abortion or on oil and gas, right? They're going to be on everyday issues. And so, once again, this wasn't my triple threat. This was my single threat, or actually one of my friends reached out to me and she said, Jonathan, I'm a speech and language pathologist. I just want to let you know, we're all leaving the state of Colorado as soon as we graduate. Okay, well, what's going on? Well, the licensure requirements here in Colorado are so different from pretty much every other state in the country that we can actually start practicing and getting as soon as we graduate in pretty much every other state except for Colorado. So yeah, we'll take the subsidized education at University of Colorado at CU Boulder. But yeah, a lot of us, unfortunately, because of student debt, we're not going to be able to stay here. And so on the far right there, you'll see the dean of the speech and language pathology program at CU. And then on the left, a professor and a student in the speech and language pathology program. If you don't know much about speech and language pathology, this was a picture from, I want to say, 2016, 2017. so important during COVID after people had been intubated and were learning sort of language skills again. It's along with physical therapy and occupational therapy, speech and language pathology is right up there. It's not only about that, it's about communicating. So for younger kids who are learning language skills during that critical development period, this has such an enormous impact. And everybody basically looked at that bill in this committee and goes, I had no idea this was a problem. Thanks for telling us the facts. Bill passes almost unanimously. So this is my pitch, though. This is why we need you at the Capitol. So we did run out of new lawyer jokes about 10 years ago, and that joke was from 10 years ago. So about 20 years ago, we ran out of new lawyer jokes. Two, this is so important for those of you who haven't been to the Capitol. You are an expert. I will tell you, my first time visiting the state legislature, I was just about to graduate college working on affordable housing issues, and there was a legislative breakfast. And what this is basically just a spread of coffee and bagels sitting out at the Capitol with, our nonprofit there, waiting for lawmakers, hungry lawmakers that are under-caffeinated to come by. And I will tell you, I only got out 2 words at that meeting. So Carol, you probably beat me at your experience at the Capitol, because I only got out 2 words to legislators that day. It was good and morning. I was so nervous. I'm like, I can't talk to these folks. They know everything about everything. And that's not the case, right? I'm the social worker who cares about mental health. But if you wanted to talk to me about water law, I probably know enough to be dangerous right now, but I would love to talk to a farmer or a rancher or a ski operator or or a conservationist, you name it, because they're by default of their lives, their life experiences being different, they're gonna know something. This is another one that I think is really important. You're not a paid lobbyist. You are volunteering your time when you come to the Capitol. When you ask to set up a meeting with your state lawmaker, or you come to a committee hearing, which, by the way, are public and anyone can testify, to say, I'm volunteering my time, that actually might be costing you money, right? When I worked in childcare, I didn't have paid time off. So the time that I was not at work was time that I was not getting paid. And so for someone to say, look, this is so important, I'm going to take my half a day or my 3 hours or whatever it is and take the time to tell you what I think is important, makes a huge difference. The last 2 is this. You're a constituent. There's an old saying at the Capitol, either lawmakers will represent their constituents or we'll get different lawmakers. So I like to remind people when they're first elected, either you will represent your constituents or someone will do it for you. And that is true. And last but not least, lawmakers, politicians, they're a lonely bunch. They're typically extroverted. And so if you ever get tongue twisted or tongue tied, you run up against a lawmaker. This is not a legislative badge, but if you see a badge that kind of looks like a legislative badge, you see the state seal and you're like, oh my gosh, looks like you're in the Colorado House or Senate. What bills are you working on right now? People love to talk about themselves. It's why this meeting is going so well for me right now. So this is how a bill becomes a law. No, that's actually bribery. Do not do this. It's literally illegal. Do not ever, under any circumstance, threaten to pay someone or withhold funds for passing a law, killing a law, amending a law. It is illegal. This is how a bill is supposed to become a law. And I know this is kind of small on some of your screens, depending on your screen. I'm not going to zoom in, but I'll give you the short version of this because it's different than the House and the Senate. And I'll ask one trivia question at the very end, and we'll see who has actually a big screen where they can read this. So bills can be introduced in the House or the Senate. Every lawmaker in Colorado, this is unique, gets 5 bills that must get a public vote. Doesn't mean that the vote count hasn't already been sort of preordained in some way. Sometimes that can flip. But this is different than at the federal level. Someone might come up with a great idea for universal health care, and the committee chair could be like, well, that bill's never seeing the light of day as long as I'm chair of this committee, right? Or someone could write a bill to ban all abortions, and the chair of that committee could go, well, it's going to my committee, but that bill will never see the light of day. You'll hear about universal health care and abortion bans at the Colorado General Assembly, because every lawmaker gets 5 bills. Each one of the 5 bills gets at least one public vote. Bills will start either in the House or the Senate. This is a little different than the federal level, where usually it kind of makes its, there's a House version and a Senate version, they come in between. It goes to a committee. The Speaker or the President of the Senate will refer that bill to a committee. So who the President of the Senate is, who the Speaker is, very important. So if you have a bill idea and you get someone to carry your bill, you might want to set up a meeting with the Speaker to make sure it goes to a committee where it's going to get a fair hearing, right? I was just looking at a bill today and someone went, well, why is it going to this committee? And I said, well, the 2 bill sponsors sit on that committee, and I'm pretty sure the President of the Senate wants this bill to pass, and they've already got 2 guaranteed votes in that first committee. It's a simple majority to get out of the first committee. It's a simple majority to get out of actually any committee. And usually, if it costs money, it goes to appropriations. If it raises money, it goes to the Finance Committee. And then it goes to the House floor, the Senate floor, and a simple majority vote, once again. And then wash, rinse, repeat. If it starts in the House, goes to the Senate, gets another public hearing, goes to that committee. If it costs money, it'll go to the Appropriations Committee. If it doesn't cost money, if it raises money, it'll go to the Finance Committee. If it raises money and costs money, it'll go to both the Appropriations and the Finance Committee. And then it goes to the governor's desk, assuming a simple majority comes through. Then there's 3 options for the governor. So first one, signs the law, right? Second one, vetoes. The third, and then veto, overridden by 2/3, just like the bill on Capitol Hill. Here's the third one that's a little unique, and I'm kind of curious if no former lawmakers who might be on this call can answer this one. And Susan, I'm gonna also make you not answer this one as well. But so they can sign a bill, they can veto a bill. There's a third option though. The governor can actually decide not to sign a bill. What happens to that bill if the governor decides not to sign it? Any guesses? You can put it in the chat if you want to put it in the chat. We're not going to make fun of you if you get the wrong answer here. Any guesses? I'm looking for hands. All right. So most people typically guess if the governor fails to sign a bill, usually it's called a pocket veto. It's actually the opposite in Colorado. If the governor fails to sign a bill within 10 days during the session or 30 days, assuming that the General Assembly is adjourned, the bill actually becomes law without the governor's signature. This actually happened to one of my bills where the governor didn't like how much money it was, or actually didn't like that it didn't cost more money. He's like, I don't think my department can implement this bill. So, but it's a good idea. So I'm just going to be really upset about it and let it become law without my signature. So I'm sure he said it much more eloquently. So how are we doing on time, Lisa?
3.5 minutes.
3.5 minutes. All right. So this is how a bill really becomes a law. It involves lobbyists. Good lobbyists can be good, bad, or neutral. Community building. Elections mean a lot. Committee testimony. Great legislators, and even better interns and students. So what do legislators actually do? Well, this is what I did at lunch. This is a picture from me talking with a group called Kids Against Fracking. We couldn't find another time to work, so I took my lunch break. Breakfast, 8 o'clock in the morning. That's the governor, the lieutenant governor, and a number of other folks all sitting there taking a look at what is going on in the world of early childhood education, 7 a.m. meeting in the building. Dinner time. If anyone remembers the gun violence prevention bills that passed in 2013, it was standing room only in every committee, in every part of that building, actually. And so even though I didn't sit on the committee that limited high-capacity magazines and required universal background checks, you know what? I decided, it's 10 o'clock at night. There's 300 people in this room. The least I can do is listen to the testimony and hear what people have to say. And this is the last slide. This is the last slide on this one. Midnight snack. Does anyone, happen to remember what happened in 2012 at the General Assembly? The last few days of the General Assembly, actually, that year. What anyone remember? What issue was the issue du jour? All right, civil unions was not legal yet. Republicans were in control of the state house by one vote, one seat, 33 to 32. And the Speaker of the House was convinced that this was not a great idea. And there were two Republicans that were gerrymandered into the same district that were running against each other in a primary who wanted to prove who was the more conservative lawmaker. And so the bill passed the Senate. It was Democratic Senate. The bill had Republican support, passed out of 3 committees in the House. 3 committees in the House, which means it had to get at least 1 Republican vote in every committee. The governor, and you can ask Claire Levy because she played an instrumental role in trying to make sure this didn't happen. The Speaker of the House decided, well, if this bill makes it to the House floor, I'm just going to put us in recess. And you have a certain time limit to pass bills once they get onto the House floor. So if the bill wasn't heard and voted on by midnight without being laid over, the bill was dead. Well, there were 40 bills waiting to be heard that night. Water projects, everything else. Didn't matter. And so at about 11 o'clock at night, maybe it was even 10 o'clock at night, basically everything came to a complete screeching halt. Somebody from the gallery was so upset, they shouted from the gallery, I hope you all die. Didn't really say who that was from or who that was directed to. So the sergeants at arms clear out the place, and here we are. And a lot of lawmakers go, well, I guess I'll pack it in. I'll go home. I figured there were so many people who were so upset. I said, you know what? I'm going to go up on social media. And, this is before Facebook Live, but I'm going to go up on Facebook. People want to put comments in the comments section. Ask me what's going on. We've got till midnight to do our job. There have been people waiting their lifetimes to enjoy the rights that heterosexual couples have been able to enjoy for centuries. The least I can do is do my job until midnight and see if anybody else wants to come back and do their job. Obviously, the bill died that day, and Democrats actually stormed back and took the House in 2013, and Democrats have not lost the majority since 2013. This is why majorities matter. It mattered so much to the people of Colorado that they basically gave Democrats the keys to the car of democracy for that very reason. And so I'm going to close on that note because I think we're just about at time. But I wanted to give you just a short, quick view into what it looks like, what it can look like, the good, the bad, the ugly. Sometimes the ugly turns into the good, though, and you never know. When your moment is called, you have an opportunity to make a difference. So anyway, I look forward. I'm sure we have about a minute left, so I look forward to one question, and I'll hang around for a little bit too.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Wonderful presentation. It's so great, I think, to have a reminder of how things actually work down there. And so I appreciate you giving us your time and doing such a great, succinct job on it. That was absolutely great. Does anybody have a question? You want to just raise your hand and I'll see if I can see it, or maybe he can see it.
I'm looking for the hands.
Yeah, I don't see
and I'm watching the chat. Well, and I'm happy to come back any other time. If you ever want to know how much lobbyists got paid to kill my bills, there's actually a website for that. So
yeah, crazy. Well, and I think the other interesting thing of to be aware of that happens, because I think it happened in 2013, was when the recalls happened because they didn't like the laws that we did go through, and that's kind of having an impact. So even though we have this super majority in, I think, the House, not Senate, if we ram everything through, then we run the risk of, being recalled and wasting money and time on things like that. So thank you so much again. Let's see. Oh, so Jen is asking if you're willing to share your contact info for follow-up questions.
Absolutely. I will put that in the chat right now. And then Carol had a question as well. And then I'm happy to let the program move forward. So.
Thank you. Sorry, I just had a quick question. I think it's probably just a point of order thing, but I think you said that every bill has to be heard by the entire body, or because you hear all the time about bills dying in committee, and I assumed that they never were heard by the entire body. So can you just clarify?
Sure. No. So every bill that's introduced, and every lawmaker gets a minimum of 5, gets one public vote in a committee. So I probably didn't clarify. I didn't probably end the sentence with one public vote in a committee. Now, one public vote doesn't necessarily mean one public hearing. So I want to be clear about that. Like 9 times out of 10, lawmakers like follow the unspoken rule that you let people sort of plead their case. But all that's really required is that they get a public vote and it gets on the record. But 99 times out of 100, you'll be allowed public testimony with it. And like I said, even with the civil unions bill, you saw Republicans crossing the aisle on that one for marriage equality.
Is that true for minority members as well?
That's true for everybody, every member of the General Assembly. So all 100 of them. Doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. Every one of them gets 5 bills, which is why I said about 500 bills a year.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure we will be having you back at some point. Thanks
I love
again.
it. Well, I'll put myself on mute. Have a great
All
night,
right,
everyone.
thank you. Look
Thanks
at
for
that.
everything.
Timer just went off. Perfect. All right. For those of you who weren't here earlier, I'm going to introduce Victor Shi. But Victor, I'm going to tell you, you have accomplished so much in your young life that I had to edit out so that I could get to you talking instead of me. So let me go ahead and put you on spotlight so people can find you. Let's see. I think that's correct. All right, great. I think I've told you guys, I found Victor through iGen Politics, which is his podcast with Jill Wine-Banks. It's amazing. Their guests are, like I said, I mentioned Carol Lenning to them already. He is the youngest delegate that was elected for Joe Biden in 2020. He's a writer, speaker, organizer, activist, podcast co-host. And are you still a freshman or are you a sophomore now at UCLA?
Oh, I'm actually a junior now.
A junior. Okay. Well, so he is a very busy young man. He's been involved in politics since 8th grade. He went to the DNC convention in 2020 at age 17 and was offered a position as an organizer for President Biden's campaign. Lots of on-air commentary. Like I said, he's been with MSNBC, CNN, NBC, PBS NewsHour, et cetera, et cetera. I will let you fill in the rest of it, Victor. And if you just kind of want to tell us a little bit more about you, where I may have missed out on something that's important or relevant. And then if you want to get into how you became involved in politics so very much at this young age.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And you hit on a lot of the cylinders. Currently, I'm here at UCLA, currently in LA. I'm originally from Chicago, so the difference in weather is something that's very nice, at least, and also much better food here. Although Chicago doesn't have terrible food, but LA is truly unparalleled. I wish I could be with everyone in person, but I guess we have the wonders of Zoom, so this is wonderful. I really got involved in politics in 8th grade, and that was I was sitting in my social studies classroom. My social studies teacher basically was lecturing the Iowa caucus and the political spectrum, and I was this 8th grader at the time, and she basically told us, it's Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders on one end of the spectrum, and then on the other end, there's Donald Trump, and I was just so fascinated by this political process and really hadn't heard much of it at the time. And then by the end of the lecture, she told us that as young people, we really have the power to make a difference. And that was one of the things that really stuck with me. She said that you especially can make a difference when it comes to state and local races, and which I think is something that not a lot of young people kind of hear a lot of the times. I think oftentimes politics is talked about on this kind of federal, national level, and hearing Jonathan talk about what's happening in the state legislature, I think is always really important because it's those areas, and it's they always say politics is local, and that you can look at politics and really feel the immediate impact of it more so on the state and local level than what's happening in Washington, D.C. And so that was really my first introduction to politics, was sitting in my 8th grade classroom and hearing my teacher talk about how important it is for young people to get involved and just start off on a local congressional campaign. And that's what I did, and it's been a blast ever since.
I'm muting myself in case my dog decides to go crazy again. So that's so wonderful, and how exciting to have a teacher involved in that, and knowing just important how social studies and civics, et cetera, are important.
Exactly,
Which I think have been cut, but given your age, that maybe some of it is still around, and that gives me hope. So getting into the generational kind of thing, obviously you can see that we skew older, and I'm Gen X. I think we have boomers. We might have the whole shebang here all on the call. And what can you tell us about what separates the different generations when it comes to voting, and how can we what do you think separates us, and then what do you think we can do to bring us together to work for the same goals?
Absolutely. So I think there are two main buckets for me that separates, I think, Gen Z and some of the other generations. The first is, so Generation Z is basically considered anyone born between 1996 and about 2010. And if you kind of look at the patterns of things that kind of happened throughout that time period, what separates Generation Z in terms of how we view the world and how we look at politics is that we really didn't have a time in our lives when we can remember what it felt like to be united. And so, you mentioned I co-host a podcast with Joe Wine-Banks. That was a time during the Watergate era when you had three major networks and they all agreed on the same facts. During 9/11, that was a time when we were barely alive. I wasn't even born on 9/11. Some people in my generation were 4 or 5. That's barely enough of time to recall. And so I think for a lot of Generation Z, we kind of live in this world where everything's kind of chaotic. Everything is divided, especially after the Obama years. I think Obama was maybe the first president who people started paying attention to. That was the president that marked hope. There was no drama during that presidency. And then you kind of got into Donald Trump, who was basically the polar opposite of Obama. He was someone who, as all of you are well aware, didn't respect institutions, didn't follow norms, didn't follow rules, broke the law, hopefully might be indicted sometime soon in the coming weeks and months. But this was someone who really, for our generation, that was the first glimpse we got into politics and really the Republican Party. And I think a lot of the things that they did were really antithetical to a lot of the values that we hold dear. This is a generation that, if you look at what's impacting our lives, it's things like climate change. We see our planet getting worse each year. You see things like gun safety. This generation is one that's plagued by gun violence, especially in schools. A lot of us, myself included, and I'm not sure what the laws in Colorado, but at least in Illinois, we had to do gun safety drills every semester. And so that was something that every student, no matter what age you were, no matter what party you were, you had to go through that experience. And it's a bit traumatizing knowing that basically, no matter where you live, you might be the subject of the next gun and mass shooting drill. And so that's another issue. And then, this past year, we saw basically abortion getting overturned for the first time. That was a right that we were born into. And so for a lot of young girls, that was something that was extremely concerning. And so you kind of have this trifecta of issues that young people care about, and one that the Republican Party really doesn't care about. And so you see this disconnect, especially between what the Republican Party is trying to do and what Gen Z believes in. So I think that's partly what makes Generation Z so different, is that we have so many things in our lives, and also that we are a generation that really hasn't ever known what it's like to be unified. And so I think, to answer your question about what we can all do going forward, I think it's especially important for older generations to talk to younger generations, and just to, I think, listen to our perspective. I think, just like this election proved, it takes all of us to make a difference. It takes all of us to do our part and have those conversations. And I think with young people, the most important thing you can do to reach Generation Z and to, bring them to the table is just to listen to us and understand our concerns. And so I think there's a power of listening. And unfortunately, that's something that you don't see quite often in our political environment anymore, given how polarized and divided we are as a country.
That's it's interesting that you say that, you've only ever been in this time when it's all so divisive. I think it swings back and forth, but this is definitely the most polarizing that I've ever witnessed and that lived through. And you to the point where you can't even talk to people that maybe are on the other side. It's unfortunate, but I love that you mentioned, listening to you guys and giving you guys the opportunity to be able to fill us in. I think it's especially interesting to see what the three issues are that you believe are important to your generation. I think that's something that we might have all guessed. Honestly, they're important to us as well, but we haven't been able to get things across. Well, we got one thing across the board and it got ripped away. But we're still working on environment and gun legislation and that sort of thing. So I'm glad that you could kind of confirm for us that's where those things are. And I think that we all align on those as being the important issues of the day. So thank you for sharing that. Sometimes in Boulder County, we have the friction between moderates and more progressives. Maybe your answer will be the same, get in the room, talk and listen, because we still have these kind of overarching goals that we still need to reach. But if you looked at specifically like housing bans or density, that kind of thing, do you have anything specific about how we can reach between each other, even though we're all under this big Democratic tent, which we know is big and diverse?
You're absolutely right. The Democratic Party, what makes us so different from the Republican Party is that we actually have a lot of people under our tent. We have Asian Americans, we have Black Americans, we have Latino Americans, we have white Americans, we have young people, old people. The Republican Party just doesn't have that. They are a party that's increasingly old, increasingly white, and it's shrinking in terms of the base. And so for the Democratic Party, it's inherently harder for all of us to come together because there's just simply more of us. There are more perspectives, there are more voices, there are more identities. And so it's always challenging. But one thing that has given me a lot of comfort, and I think we saw this in Congress during the first week, was someone like Hakeem Jeffries. He's someone who's not the most progressive. He's someone who I think politically, ideology kind of aligns more with Nancy Pelosi or the moderate wing of the Democratic Party. But every single time that the Democrats voted for Hakeem Jeffries, it was every Democrat who voted for him. I think it was 15 rounds at the end, and everyone united behind him. And I think that was an incredibly powerful testament of kind of the power and the strength that Democrats have when they come together. And I think, obviously, no one's going to have the exact same view. We might have different ways to approach issues, but I think at the end of the day, the outcome is the same for Democrats. We all want to see a better future. We all want to see a climate that is habitable. We all want to see, people get the housing that they need and they deserve. And so I think that in the policy discussions, that might be a little bit different, but at the end of the day, I think Democrats, there is a strength for all of us to come together and unite. And that doesn't mean abandoning values. That doesn't mean throwing away our core principles. That means that at the end of the day, settling for something that we can all agree on, knowing that, oftentimes I think for Democrats, especially young people, there is this tendency and this urge to kind of wish for it all or want, everything to happen all at once. But if we can all realize that it's easier to get there just in small incremental steps. And that's what we saw on the federal level with the Safer Communities Act. That wasn't everything that we wanted, but it was a first step to getting where we want to be. And sometimes I think we lose sight of, our end goal because we want to get to that end goal immediately. And I think it's much helpful to kind of get there in small incremental steps. And just, I think, recognize that we all have so much more that unites us than divides us. And I think that's kind of a cliche saying in politics now, but it's so true. And I think we saw that with Hakeem Jeffries, that if we can come together and if we can show, the country that we can work together and unite, I think that is incredibly powerful for how we can actually govern and legislate.
I agree with you. And I think that Hakeem Jeffries, that what he was able to pull for the first time that he's in leadership and hold it all together, that was something that, he's building off of what Nancy Pelosi built. And I also think that bringing him up, I for one was not that I love Nancy, but I was thrilled that we've got a younger group of people that are in leadership. And you may or may not know, but our representative in Congress is Joe Neguse, who is part of that leadership team. So we are very, very spoiled here. We love him and we take care of him and he does the same. And we are very supportive of him going forward. So I love that you are talking about small incremental steps, because that is almost it's a more moderate position, but I think it's the reality that sometimes that's what we need to do, because again, we don't all get what we want all the time, and working together to get to the larger goal is going to get there if we take the steps to get there along the way, and doing it together will be more effective and efficient. So so that kind of answered my next one. Do you have specific ideas or ways that you intend to get things done in order to continue turning out your generation?
Yeah, so ahead of 2024, so I'm a part of a group called Voters of Tomorrow. One of the things that we do is just we have kind of two components. The first is education. So that means really providing the resources for Generation Z and high schoolers, starting them younger, because we know that data shows that if you get someone who, you know, might be in high school or college, if you get them in that civic mindset earlier on, the more likely they're going to be habitual voters, lifelong voters, basically. If you can get someone voting at age 18, the more likely they're going to vote at age 45, at age 50. And so the sooner you can build that habit of just participating in democracy, the better it is for democracy as a whole. And so that's part of the thing that we're doing at Voters of Tomorrow, is just that education component. Things like providing resources to know how to register to vote, what type of IDs you need. And one of the things that makes America so unique, for better or for worse, is that every state has a bit of a different election procedure. So what you might have in Colorado differs greatly from Illinois, might differ a lot from, say, Oklahoma or Georgia. And so part of it is kind of going in those communities, going in those states, and providing them with the resources that they need to get registered to vote, understand what IDs they need, understand what materials they need to access the ballot box. So there's that component, but then there's also the engagement component. So those are things like calling voters, volunteering, being on the ground, and meeting young people where they are. And I think part of the challenge with Generation Z is that the traditional model of meeting people where they are is just different with this generation. For I think traditional voters, or maybe older voters, the way that you would meet someone where they are, and maybe non-COVID times, is through the door. You would knock on the door. You would maybe go to in-person settings and meet them for coffee, meet them for dinner, meet them for a quick snack, or in their homes. But for Generation Z, that means meeting people where they are, online spaces. So that means things like Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. And so the whole playing field has kind of shifted from being on the ground, maybe being in the so-called turf, into things like social media platforms. And that's the challenge, because it's one thing to, I think, post something on social media, but it's another thing to actually get someone's attention. And with Generation Z, one of the challenges is, this is a generation that I think I read recently that our attention spans are about 3 to 5 seconds. So the ability to reach someone in our generation is very, very difficult, because we just have such a short attention span, and it takes a lot to engage us and hook us. And so that's something that Voters of Tomorrow and myself, that I'm trying to do, is just, one, provide the education component, but also not stopping with that mobilization or that engagement component, because as we see with the last election, we can't take a pause. That's the unfortunate reality of politics. Organizing is constant. We can't just do it a few weeks in advance. We have to do it daily. It has to be something that's constant, that's always a part of our lives. And that's how you win elections, because what they're doing on the other side is they're doing the same thing. They're winning up the votes in these rural areas, and that's how they're able to slowly and creep up, or maintain their power. And so as Democrats, we have to do the same, but even more. And that means every single day, having those conversations, meeting people where they are, either in-person space or online spaces, and continuing those conversations, and always beating the drum about why it's so important to go out there and make your voices heard.
I agree. And I don't know if you had a chance to see, but our mission statement is educate, engage, elect. So we're right there. We're like, right, lining up perfectly. I'm curious, have you heard of New Era?
I have not heard of New Era. No.
Okay, so it's homegrown here in Colorado. In fact, Joe Neguse is one of the founders of it, and same deal, where they were looking for helping youth getting registered to vote, getting them to the polls, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to turn this over to Julia Hunt, who is a senior in high school. She has a question for you, and I'm going to figure out how to Julia, if you can unmute yourself, please do. I think you can, but if not, I'll try to figure that out.
Oh yeah, I got it. Thanks.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, so thank you for being on this call. This is very exciting, and I didn't know you were the delegate for Biden, so that's really cool. So I'm the co-leader of the Fairview Young Democrats Club, and I'm a senior in high school. And so we were gonna have some other members here today, but I think other people ended up having scheduling conflicts, so it's just me. But I think we were all kind of wondering if you had any advice for like younger activists, and just how you got to be in your positions where you're affecting a lot of change.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And first of all, thanks for all that you do and your voice and being a young person in politics. It's not the easiest. And so I know how much that takes. And also as a senior, what a busy time. I mean, I'm not too much older than you, but I'm a few years older than you. And I remember senior year was really chaotic with colleges and trying to, decide where you want to go. So hopefully you know a home so far. If you don't worry, you will have a home. In terms of my advice for any young activist out there, I would say knowing your power, knowing your voice is really important. I think a lot of the times we look at politics, it's scary, it's daunting. You look at what's happening in DC, it's not really reflective of what's happening across the country. But I would say first, just starting small, starting local is important. I mentioned this kind of at the beginning, but I really think there's a power in terms of knowing your kind of voice, knowing kind of where you belong in this political process on the local level. And that means volunteering for a campaign, maybe volunteering for an organization that you're passionate about, but really finding that one thing and starting small. I think that's really how you kind of find your voice and find your agency in this political process. And then the great thing about politics is I think it's one of those things that I think is truly a meritocracy. So that means as long as you show up, as long as you do the work, as long as you put in effort, the likelihood of you being rewarded and being, maybe I don't want to use the word promoted, but being kind of elevated to the next level or finding new opportunities is so much easier. So I would say first, finding something, but not being afraid to make your voice heard and continue being eager doing that job. And I think just finding something and doing that something well is the best piece of advice I can give to any young activist. And then also using the power of social media. I think for me, last year at this time I was about at a couple hundred followers, but there's something about, I don't know, the social media algorithm, something about that where, any young person, as long as you have a platform, you can really use social media for the better. And it's on TikTok, on Instagram, especially on TikTok, you can blow up very randomly. And so I think not being afraid to make your voice heard and elevating those issues that are most important to you on those different social media platforms is, I think, particularly powerful as a young person right now in politics.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a great answer. I actually have to hop off now, but thank you so much again for coming, and it was great hearing you speak.
Great
Bye.
meeting you.
Thanks, Julia. Hope to see you next month. I have a question here. So specifically on colleges, right? So we have around 35,000 students here at CU in Boulder, and getting them, to the polls and engaged can be challenged. Besides meeting them at their, where they are, whether it's just social media or what, do you think that, I mean, I make phone calls, right? During campaigns, I can't get anybody to answer phone, let alone, younger people. So maybe is there something that you would suggest that's specific to getting those college students to the poll?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And that's one of the things that at least for this last election, something that we noticed was the polling, right? And so the traditional way that you contact young voters is through phone calls. And that's one of the things that for myself, and I know many other young activists, we said, don't trust in the polls because no young person will actually pick up the phone. For me, I wouldn't even pick up the phone for my parents if they called me every day. And so the likelihood of us picking up a phone call when it comes from a random number and they want to talk to us for more than 5 minutes is very, very slim. And so it's hard for young people, to pick up the phone, and that makes organizing, I think, more challenging. And that's, I think, where you kind of start to look at what other tools are available. And I mentioned social media, I think that's important, but I think also things like texting. Texting, I think, makes a big difference. Unfortunately, young people now view texting as a form of conversation, whether or not you believe that's true. I think it's a generational difference, but for young people now, texting is another way that you reach young people. And so I would say that's the way that you can reach young people. I would say also, making voting somehow fun. I know a lot of the times that when we talk about voting, I think it's, you have to do your duty, you have to, do it, otherwise, the world's going to be doomed. But I think if we can make voting a little bit funner for young people and say, bring along a friend, after you vote, get a cup of coffee or get some dessert or go out and eat a nice dinner. I think if we can make it fun and encourage young people to kind of make it some sort of group activity, I think that's what we've seen at Voters of Tomorrow really helps make a difference, is just, making it less intimidating. I think that's one of the biggest things about voting and kind of participating in the civic process for a lot of young people, is that we look at this kind of system that we have built for us, and it's hard to access, right? You look at things like drop-off ballots, or you look at election centers, and oftentimes those are places and things that are quite far away from college students, and it's inaccessible for us to reach on, say, election day. And so I think there's that aspect of making it funner, and then always providing resources. I think there's whether it's on social media, whether it's email, whether it's in person and handing out pamphlets, I think providing those resources are really important, because a lot of the times as students, we are too busy to think about how we register to vote, about how we can early vote. And I think as long as we can provide those resources, it can be much better in terms of getting young people to be aware of the civic process and then to ultimately take action.
Sure, makes sense. And along those lines, I'm not sure how. Do you vote in Illinois or California? Probably. Well,
so I voted in Illinois this past election.
Yeah. Okay. So here we have vote by mail. It is very, very easy. However, students tend to move around a lot. And so every time you move, you have to get re-registered, right? But that being, regardless of that, we have sometimes really, really long ballots with very long ballot measures. What do you tell your friends and your voters through voters of tomorrow? How do you tell them to deal with those issues that they may or may not know about, may not understand, et cetera?
Yeah, so I mean, that's also one of the biggest challenges is, for young people, it's already time consuming enough, but, I think it's important, and what we saw, especially with Jonathan and his presentation on state legislatures, is these are the things that really matter. And so, yes, it might take a long time, but these are things that will really impact your life. We saw this in Michigan this past election with one of their ballots. I think it was Proposition 13, where if you voted, you had the ability to decide whether or not Roe v. Wade and the access to abortion would be enshrined in the Constitution. And that's what we saw a lot of young people turn out to vote. Michigan, I think, was one of those states that saw a huge increase in turnout compared to 2018. And I think it's partly because you had a ballot measure like that had a stake involved in it. And so I think the more we can kind of push down ballot measures, down ballot races for young people and just people in general, I think that's something that gets overlooked quite frequently, is those down ballot races. And so we see that across the country. Just because we vote for Congress doesn't mean that the state legislatures are immune either. Across the country, you see this in Florida and Georgia and Texas. Those down ballot state legislatures, those governors, those elected officials all have a big impact. And those are the states you're seeing what the impact of not voting for those ballot measures are, or those state legislatures. It's things like restricting voting, making it harder for young people to be in the classroom and access education. Today, Ron DeSantis rejected this request from the College Board to institute some sort of advanced placement African-American studies program because he thought it was unlawful. And so you have these things where, these people have tremendous power, and we have the power to elect better people into office, to pass ballot measures that will make a difference. And sure, it might take an extra 5 minutes to go online and Google search, but the impact of that, I think, is going to be much bigger once you go out there and vote for those ballot measures. So I think, if we frame it in a way where, yes, it'll take a lot of yes, it won't take, maybe as much time as if you were just to, go out there and vote, but I think it's important for all of us to do the research, to be equipped with the facts, and then go out there and make our voices heard for those down ballot measures, because those are the areas that will have the most impact on our lives.
Right. In the long term, especially, right?
In the long term, yes. Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm not sure if there are any other, scroll through here. Okay. All right. I did, I think that's I think we've kind of covered everything. I personally would just love to know, how did you get to know Jill Wine-Banks? Like, how did that story come together? You guys are so awesome. And you guys bring such different perspectives, obviously, but I really enjoy your podcast. I hope everybody here will check it out. I'll put it in the notes after. But like, how did you guys get together?
Well, it was a bit of a random encounter, actually. So we were both running to become delegates in Illinois. I was in the 10th congressional district, and she was in another congressional district near Evanston. But one of the things that they have you do for delegates is you all kind of get together, all the delegates who are running in Illinois get together at some sort of convention or party. And I saw her at one of those, and I remember seeing her on MSNBC earlier that year because it was the whole Mueller investigation. She was on MSNBC talking about the differences between Nixon and Trump. And I remember seeing her and I was like, oh my gosh, you are Jill Wine Banks. And she said, yes. And she said, why are you here? Because I was the only person basically at that event who was under the age of 65, because most people who run for delegates are older, no offense, but most people who are running for delegates are a little bit older. And so I found myself to be one of the only person under the age of 65. And so she thought it was really interesting how someone my age at the time could be supporting Joe Biden and someone her age could be supporting Joe Biden. So we thought of creating some sort of intergenerational dialogue. And so we created this podcast that has one mission, which is to engage all generations in politics. Because I think, like we're seeing on this Zoom call, it takes all of us in this fight to protect democracy, to save democracy. And just because young people turn out to vote, that isn't enough. We need older generations to do their part too, and we need younger generations to do our part. And that's, I think, the power of what makes this democracy so special, is that it really does have each of us to do our part in order to protect and preserve it. And so that was how I met Jill, and it's been such a thrill to learn from her and to do this podcast. And I know hopefully she'll speak to all of you in the coming months to come, but she's a great person, and I know you will all learn a lot from her, as I always do.
Yes, yes. Well, Victor, I can't thank you enough for your time. I know you're a very busy man, and with all of the things you have going on and studying. So thank you again. And I will make sure that we all learn more about Voters of Tomorrow and see where we can support you there. And if there's anything else that you have questions for us, you have my information. Please be in contact and let us know how we can assist you in whatever way. And I think I can speak for all of us to say that we look forward to reaching out to the younger generations and making sure that we get our democracy back and that we hold it, and then we move forward in a progressive manner instead of backwards. So thank you again so much. And I look forward to hearing you again soon on IGen Politics.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a great one. Thank you for all you do. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Okay. Let me try to unmute everyone. I don't know. I think I have to go back.
Thanks,
Right?
that was great.
So impressive. I think everybody can unmute themselves if they want. So I do realize we're running past time a bit, but I'm glad that you guys could all make it, and hope you understand that we wanted to keep everybody safe and warm. So our next meeting, we will have something called the Truth Sandwich presentation, which some of you may have seen before. It's being conducted by the Indivisible group. It's Jody Rain, who used to be the leader of Indivisible Colorado. And we're doing this in conjunction with Forever Indivisible. It's a really fascinating presentation that gives us tools to bridge that gap and talking with people who may not be in the same arena as we are in our thinking into our politics. I think it'll also apply with talking with young kids, because sometimes I'm talking to my kids and I'm like, wow, okay, what? I think you probably all noticed what I meant about him being an old soul. Extremely, he's just so impressive. I can't gush about him enough. So for that, I guess we'll just plan to see you all next month, February 15th. And my goal is to send out emails without mistakes.
Happy New Year.
A little
everybody.
bar here.
Oh, come on, I like your mistakes.
Well, let you know I'm human for sure. So, all right. Thank you guys so much. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.